Maya Patel pressed her forehead to the porthole of the turboprop, watching the moonlit ice pans drift past like luminous scales on the back of some sleeping leviathan. The old plane rattled, dipped, and then leveled as it descended toward the packed snow runway of Camp Vigil, a joint research station perched 100 kilometers south of the magnetic pole. She could already feel the cold seeping through the double panes, despite her fleece-lined parka. Below, the camp's few sodium lamps glowed amber against the blue night, a fragile constellation in the vast emptiness. When the cargo door finally groaned open, she tasted air so sharp it felt surgical. Two bundled figures trudged out, their headlamps spraying cones of light. One introduced himself with a lopsided grin. "Gabe Taylor, station manager. Welcome to the last outpost." The other offered a quick nod without removing his goggles. "Eric Wolf, glaciology," he said, voice muffled. Then he hoisted a crate of medical supplies onto a sled and started across the snow without waiting for acknowledgement. Stoic, Maya thought, watching the rigid set of his shoulders. She'd read about him. Papers on basal lubrication, subglacial hydrology, alarming projections for the Jakobshavn Glacier's retreat. Yet nowhere in his CV had she encountered the word personable. Still, she was here to serve as Camp Vigil's only medical provider for the spring season. Good bedside manner was part of the job, even if the bedside was a solar-powered infirmary and the patients were ice-obsessed introverts. Inside the main module, the air was stuffy with steam from drying parkas. Gabe gave her the 5-minute tour: galley, lounge, lab wings, gym no bigger than a broom closet, an infirmary, 2 bunks, an ultrasound machine older than she was, shelves of antibiotics, suture kits, and, in Gabe's words, hope in bottles. Outside, the temperature hovered at near 0.8 degrees. Inside, the coffee brewed hot and bitter. She stowed her duffel, pinned up a laminated triage chart, and decided to make rounds. There were only 10 other residents, easy enough to memorize. She found a climatologist dosing himself with vitamin D lamp, an engineer nursing a sprained wrist, and a seismologist complaining of insomnia, all grateful, all chatty. Eric Wolf, however, was nowhere in sight. Gabe shrugged when she asked. "Eric's usually in the cold room. Finds the living quarters too warm." He handed her a fleece balaclava. "If you challenge him to a few hours at 15, he might say hello, but don't take it personal. He's his own glacier." Curiosity trumped comfort. Maya suited up, followed Gabe's directions to the annex, and keyed open a metal door. A blast of chilled air stole her breath. The room's floor was grafted ice. Sensors and cables dangled like veins in transparent flesh. At the center, a man knelt over a core sample, locked in a vise, headlamp illuminating crystalline rings. Eric didn't look up. "Sorry to intrude," she began. "Just checking in on everyone." "No pulse anomalies among ice cores," he replied without humor. Then realizing, he stood. "Apologies. I get absorbed." She pulled back her hood. "I'm Maya, the volunteer nurse." He removed one glove to shake her hand, skin cold as marble. "We're fortunate to have you. Injuries increase once the melt season ramps up." His voice held neither warmth nor dismissal. Simply fact. But for a moment, their eyes met, and she caught a flicker of fatigue behind his calm gray irises, as though he'd stood sentinel against encroaching loss for too long. That night, while typing notes, Maya learned from Gabe that Eric had wintered here the past 3 years straight. No mid-season breaks, no flights home. "He's recording a time-lapse of the Aurora Ridge ice tongue," Gabe said. "Says interruptions would contaminate the data. Personally, I think the data's only half the reason." "What's the other half?" "Grief, maybe. Heard his partner was a marine biologist. Lost at sea during a storm off Svalbard. He never speaks of it, so we don't pry." Maya folded the file shut. Empathy flooded her, heavy as the Arctic night. Weeks slipped into an unusual rhythm. Each morning, she logged vitals of both people and station, blood pressures and inventory lists, CO2 levels inside the habitat, ketone counts for the engineer on a bet to eat only dehydrated rations. At lunch, everyone gathered for Gabe's rehydrated chili, their conversation a mosaic of data points and dark humor. Everyone except Eric. He appeared only at breakfast to pour black coffee, then vanished with notebooks and thermal drills. Yet small intersections occurred. Maya found him in the galley one twilight, defrosting packets of spinach. He was rubbing his right wrist, skin mottled. "Let me see," she insisted, taking his hand before he could protest. The joint was swollen, red lines threading up his forearm. "Just a strain from the auger." "Red striations, this pronounced suggest cellulitis," she said, already palpating for heat. "You need antibiotics and rest. The boreholes won't drill themselves. They also won't close shop because you take 2 days off. Besides, if this spreads, you'll be medevaced and your project truly delayed." He studied her, perhaps weighing pride against logic, and finally nodded. "Fine." Maya escorted him to the infirmary, administered IV cefazolin, wrapped the limb, and set him up with podcasts. As the drip ticked, she perched on the stool. "These ice cores," she asked. "What do they tell you?" He considered. Recordings of the planet's breath, bubbles trapped for 50, sometimes 80,000 years. Ratios of oxygen isotopes reveal temperatures. Dust layers reveal volcanic eruptions. Sulfates hint at human pollution. Their memory frozen, and now they're melting. Yes. A shadow crossed his face. My models show Aurora Ridge could lose 30% mass by decade's end. We are witnessing a library burn, page by page. The IV beeped. She replaced the saline bag with practiced ease. "Libraries can be rebuilt," she offered. "But not that one." He looked away, and she glimpsed the grief Gabe had mentioned, a raw wound hidden beneath scientific detachment. She did not fill the silence with platitudes. Instead, she laid her warm palm over the bandage, letting the contact speak. The infection subsided. Eric returned to work, but stopped by the infirmary daily, sometimes under the pretense of changing dressings, sometimes simply to sit. They traded stories. Her childhood in Houston's humid sprawl, his German-Norwegian upbringing among fjords. She told him laughter was a universal solvent. He countered that pressure and time made diamonds. She pinned one of his satellite printouts to the infirmary wall, and he pretended to scowl when she decorated it with cartoon penguin stickers. Early May brought the year's first surface melt. Runnels of water cut serpents across the ice sheet, glinting cobalt in the sun. The camp buzzed with urgency. Sensors had to be repositioned before crevasses widened. Eric invited Maya to accompany the team, partly for medical coverage, partly, she suspected, because he wanted her to see what he saw. They departed by snowmobile at dawn. The horizon blazed pink and gold, as if the sky were on fire while the earth still slept. After an hour, they reached the plateau above Valhalla Canyon, a chasm carved by retreating glaciers. Maya's breath caught. Below, aquamarine pools punctured the white expanse like eyes staring back at the heavens. Thunder cracked as calving ice blocks shattered into the abyss. Eric killed the engine. "This wasn't here 5 years ago," he said quietly. She followed him to the edge, where he planted a pole sensor. As he drove it in, a fisher groaned nearby. Instinctively, she reached for his elbow to steady him. He flashed a grateful glance. Returning, they found their path partially collapsed. A bridge of snow spanned a new crevasse, hairline thin. Gabe radioed, "Detour east, 2 kilometers." But the detour would burn precious daylight and fuel. "We can cross," Eric judged, scanning the gap. Load is distributed if we go on foot. Roped. Maya swallowed, staring at the blue-black depth, but nodded. They leashed themselves with climbing harnesses, Gabe anchoring from solid ground. Step by step, they crept across. Halfway, a boom resounded. The snow under Eric's right boot fractured. He plunged waist-deep, arms flailing. "Hold!" Maya yelled, bracing the rope with her full weight. Snow dust erupted around them. Benighted stillness followed. "I'm okay," he rasped, dangling above the void. She inched forward, hammered her pick into firmer crust, and hauled. Muscles screamed. The cold bit through layers. At last, he scrambled onto the lip, chest heaving. They remained sprawled, tethered, listening to their heartbeats echo in their ears. When they made camp that night, inside a prefab shelter, Maya inspected his leg. The fall had wrenched his hip, bruising bloomed violet. She applied compresses, wrapped him in an emergency blanket, and handed over a thermos of cocoa. "You saved me," he said simply, voice thin. "You already saved yourself by wearing the harness." He looked at her over the rim of the cup. "It's easier saving data than people. Charts don't talk back. They don't have bright brown eyes that keep looking until they see." Heat flared in her cheeks. "You underestimate charts. They can guilt-trip entire nations." A smile tugged his lips, the first she'd seen unguarded. Something unspoken melted between them, quieter than snowfall, but no less real. Back at Camp Vigil, the days lengthened toward perpetual daylight. With sun 20 hours above the horizon, sleep schedules blurred. Nights were scheduled rather than experienced. Yet inside, time felt distinct. Each moment with Eric carried new texture. They shared rituals, brewing coffee at Oro 400 while the others snored, trading annotated novels, his margins full of equations, hers of doodles, crowding over the microscope as she cultured bacteria from meltwater and he compared particle counts. He teased that she'd turned the infirmary into a greenhouse with her scavenged herb garden. She retorted that fresh basil reduced hypertension, though, she noted, his blood pressure had already improved. Late one night, while others watched a film, Eric knocked on her door. In his hands lay a sliver of perfectly clear ice encased in acrylic. Air bubbles striated it like Morse code. "It's from our deepest core," he explained. 22 meters down, roughly 78,000 years old. "I thought you should have a piece of the library." Maya traced the entombed bubbles. "I'll guard it with my life." He hesitated, then said, "There's a ridge about 10 kilometers north, Enoch's Window. At 0200 local, the sun skims the horizon right through an arch of ice. It won't last many seasons. Would you come with me?" She understood the invitation was not just to see a sight, but to step further into his world, brittle and beautiful. "I'd love to," she answered. They left on skis, slicing across hushed snow. At the ridge, they removed packs, climbing the last meters on crampons. The arch loomed, a frozen cathedral doorway. As predicted, the sun brushed its hollow, flames of gold refracting into rainbows. Maya gasped. The structure hummed faintly, water trickling from its keystone. Eric stood beside her, eyes reflecting fire and ice. "My partner, Anya, always wanted to witness this," he whispered. "We planned a joint expedition, but—" Wind carried away the rest. Maya touched his gloved hand. "Tell me about her." He did. About nights on trawlers, sampling plankton, her laugh echoing off ship hulls, her stubbornness equal to his. Words tumbled like calving ice. The storm, the foam, the empty sea. He'd buried himself in glaciers afterward, cooling surface pain to solid grief. When he finished, tears had frozen at the corners of his lashes. Maya reached up, brushed them away. The sunlight flared behind the arch like a benediction. You kept your promise to bear witness, she said, and now someone else is here to keep it with you. Eric turned, and she saw his composure splinter, not into collapse, but into openness. He cupped her face, forehead resting against hers. "Thank you for thawing me," he murmured. Their lips met, tentative, then sure. Above them, a fissure cracked inside the arch. Ice flakes drifted like confetti around their embrace. The following weeks rushed by in bright currents. Station gossip circulated, but in the open, Eric's and Maya's connection felt as natural as sunlight. They still argued over antibiotics versus rest, or sampling depth versus safety margins, yet laughter undercut every dispute. One morning, a satellite transmission announced a surprise visit from international press, eager to film melting fronts. Gabe panicked over dust on bunks. Maya teased him and organized a quick cleanup. Eric prepared his data sets, but dreaded the interviews. "Sound bites don't fit the science," he grumbled. When the crew arrived, 2 journalists and a cameraman, they zeroed in on tragedy and doom. Eric's shoulders stiffened. Maya slipped beside him, resting fingers on his wrist. "Talk about the library," she whispered. He took a breath and did, describing ancient air, stories trapped inside crystals, humanity's chance to read and learn before the pages liquefied. His words, though measured, carried quiet passion. The cameraman lowered the lens slightly, listening. Afterward, Eric exhaled. "You make me brave." "You were brave already." "I just turned on the light." On the summer solstice, Camp Vigil held a midnight barbecue on the roof deck. Music crackled through battered speakers, Aurora ghosting across the sunlit sky. Eric produced a violin, a surprise stashed since winter, and played a folk melody that seemed carved from fjord walls. Maya hummed harmony. The others fell silent, even the generators respectful. Later, she asked where he'd learned. "Anya taught me," he said. "For days when words fail." She traced the instrument's weathered wood. "Then play again. For her, for the ice, for us." He did, and she danced slow circles, boots crunching on gravel. All too soon, transport schedules arrived. Maya's rotation ended August 1st. She packed medical logs, basil seeds, the acrylic ice relic. On her last evening, clouds banked the horizon. Fog rolled in, swallowing distance. The station seemed to float, unmoored. Eric found her cataloging supplies. "Come to the runway tomorrow," he said, "before the plane lands." The next morning, wind rattled flags. She trudged to where he stood by the threshold of ice and sky, holding a sealed envelope. "I've accepted a visiting lectureship in Oslo," he told her. "It's only 6 months. But it's the first time I've planned to leave the ice. I'd like you to visit." He handed the envelope. Inside lay 2 photographs, Inuk's window aglow, and the 2 of them laughing beside the sensor mast, snow in Maya's hair. "Turn them over," he urged. On the backs, he'd scrawled coordinates and a date, 8 months hence, spring equinox, along with 4 words, "Rebuild the library together?" Maya's throat tightened. Planes, visas, hospital contracts, all practicalities, fluttered like loose pages in a new book. She tucked the photos into her parka, rose on tiptoe, and kissed him, Arctic wind swirling around. "Yes," she said. "Yes." The turboprop's engines grew from a distant growl to a propeller roar. As she boarded, she looked back. Eric stood alone, yet no longer solitary, one hand raised. The glare on his goggles, hiding eyes she now knew were anything but cold. The plane lifted, banking over Aurora Ridge. Below, the glacier shimmered, alive with fractures and rivers and memories. And standing amid it all was a man gradually, unmistakably, warming